passport control, I was immediately turned around. Told me it would be a few minutes that I'd had to wait, and it wasn't a few minutes, it was 22 hours.
Obviously, I witnessed a lot of oppression. Just getting to work, sort of what would normally be a 15-minute drive, could often take an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours because of the checkpoints along the way.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 22 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. Last week, we talked briefly about the beating of Medea Benjamin as she tried to join a women's delegation in Egypt. They were on their way to Gaza. The Al-Sisi regime of Egypt not only barred her, but all the 100 women from France, the United States, and other countries who are trying to show solidarity with the women of the Gaza Strip. Our show today will start with a video made by Zevon, one of the women who was turned away. And then we'll air a portion of a Skype interview I did with Medea Benjamin. After that, we get into the attack on free speech that's going on college campuses. We'll be airing a segment from Democracy Now!, talking about how the administration at Northeastern University in Boston turned against a chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, barring them from activity on the campus because they had the gall to pass out flyers with mock Israeli eviction notices on them. This all takes place in the context of a major civil liberties conference that will be taking place on the campus of Central Connecticut State University on March 29th. We'll have a bit of video of the keynote speaker, Hedges. We close with talk by Michael Daly of the Interfaith Peace Builders, telling how he got involved in that organization. We begin with Zevon's video, much of it shot in Cairo Airport.
My name is Zevon, and I've just returned from an attempt by 100 women to enter Gaza in solidarity with the women and children of Gaza. Before we left, we went to the AIPAC conference in Washington, D.C. to protest Israel's blockade and brutal treatment of the people. I was there with my friend Paki Weiland and Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, who had organized the U.S. contingent of this 100-woman delegation. Medea left that night for Cairo and then to go into Gaza. She was stopped at the Cairo airport and was brutally beaten. They deported her and with no real reason given.
As soon as I got to the passport control, I was immediately turned around. Told me it would be a few minutes that I'd had to wait, and it wasn't a few minutes, it was 22 hours. I was detained along with 30 other French women, and when the French women couldn't get through, the rest of them didn't even try. They all stood in solidarity. We sat on the floor, we sang songs, we did chants, we waved flags, clapping, everything, dancing. Not where we wanted to be, but we made it what we wanted it to be, and I hope that our message gets out, that this is about the women of Gaza. It is not about our experience, but it is our attempt to bring attention to their suffering.
My group was sequestered in an airport gate area, boarding gate area, for 28 hours.
This whole pursuit was to show solidarity and support for the women of Gaza. And the fact that Egypt wouldn't even let us out of the airport, my concern is that the message that these people are going to receive was like, we are that much more isolated.
Our intention had been to visit Gaza's International Women's Day celebration We've been invited there by women's organizations and by the UN Relief and Works Agency that provides education for Gaza children. We were bringing presents and other solar lamps for people who have suffered from the lack of electricity for the last year or so, and in the hopes that that might be helpful.
I can't imagine being a person living in Gaza, wondering when the F-16s are going to be flying overhead again with the bombs that they're going to be dropping, and the fact that the eyes and ears of the world aren't paying attention.
Or that you are at the checkpoint and you have a very sick kid on the shoulder of the mother, and the checkpoint should open, but they don't. And the kid looks at me with these big brown eyes, really asking me, why doesn't it open? Why can't you help me to open this checkpoint? I need to go to the hospital.
Her message was this. She says, I lie in bed and I listen to the bombs go off. And I listen to the buildings that they hit. And as I'm lying in bed, I think, dear God, I pray that it's not my house, that it's not me and my family that's going to be receiving this next bomb that's going to land on the streets of Gaza. But as I realize that I'm praying for this, at the same time, I'm aware that if it doesn't hit my house, it's going to hit somebody else's house. And the guilt that I feel for making these prayers, realizing that somebody's going to take the bomb.
But just these really sad eyes. And I was trying to call the helpline and to kind of force the soldier sitting there to open the gate. But she just smiled at me and polished her nails. Those are little situations which really get to your heart, and you just feel like, oh my God.
They were throwing tear gas into a school with really young children. And
the first school day, kids with dressed up and nice hair and their Mickey Mouse bag on their back, very proud, having their first school day. And the parents were not allowed to go to the checkpoint, and the kid had to go alone. And through this huge, really prison-like gate to the other side to enjoy her first school day.
It seems so wrong that women in Gaza cannot speak in their own voice to people around the world, that they are being shut away from every opportunity to express their own situation. Meanwhile, the great powers that connive in this really wicked policy of a siege are constantly quoted in the newspapers and in the media expressing their point of view. The women of Gaza, the Egyptian state has tried to silence them by preventing people like us from visiting with them and standing with them and conveying what they have to say to the rest of the world. And it's really time for more and more people to say, this is enough. We have to question these policies and listen to, and we have to hear from actual people who are not just chess pieces on a board, but who are real people who live real lives and have the right to their own rights and have human rights.
Now to the audio interview I did with Medea Benjamin of Code Pink. We talked about her beating at the hands of Egyptian authorities, AIPAC's convention and the Code Pink picket, and her upcoming reception of the Gandhi Peace Award. We have the full interview on our website in the podcast section. In the section I'm going to play for you here, we talk about her mistreatment in Egypt, first by Al-Sisi's men and then by her own government.
As you mentioned, I had done this many times before, and so I was really shocked when I got up to the passport control and they looked at my name, put it in a computer, and then said, come with us. It took me somewhere for about 5 hours until they said that they were going to start a legal proceeding against me threw me into.
One second, when you say took you somewhere, to a cell or to a room, or?
Well, first they just took me into a separate room, and they kept saying that nothing was wrong, that they just give them 10 more minutes, that everything would be fine. And then about 5 hours later, it was clear that everything was not going to be fine. That's when they said they were going to start legal proceedings against me. Would not say what that was or why they were doing it, and that's when they put me into a cell.
Now, I understand they didn't take away your cell phone, so you let your friends know about this, and what did they do?
They immediately started calling the embassy, asking them to get down to the airport to help me out. They also tried to get me a lawyer, and all this was going on all night long, and yet come 8 in the morning when 5 plainclothes, scary-looking Egyptians came in, all men, and told me to come with them. I was still at that point insisting that somebody from the U.S. Embassy was on their way, and could they please just give me a little more time.
Now, before we go to the next moments, the press was reporting the Egyptian side, rather ludicrously. They said that when you got off the plane, they told you the border to Gaza was closed, and you physically confronted airport security people.
Oh, I didn't even hear that one, Stan.
Oh, yeah.
That's just insane. They never told me that the border of Gaza was closed. They never talked to me at all about why I was being treated like that. And I would never confront anybody physically. I just don't do that.
All right. So 7 hours or so, you're detained, and then 5 guys come after you or come to you, and then what happened?
As I mentioned, I was asking them to give me 10 more minutes because supposedly the embassy was on the way, and instead they threw me down to the ground, put their knees into my back, put 2 sets of handcuffs on me so tight, and then started dragging me by my arm so violently that my arm popped out of its socket. And while I was beginning to scream from the pain, took my scarf and stuffed it into my mouth and dragged me like that through the airport to the tarmac where there was a waiting Turkish airline airplane that they wanted to put me on to deport me.
And I guess you couldn't say anything more at that point. Is that what happened next? You were thrust onto this plane?
No, at that point, the Turkish airline said that they couldn't put me on in such pain that I needed medical attention, and they did call an ambulance. It took a long time for the ambulance to get there. When it finally did, the doctor said that I needed to go to the hospital and get the arm put back into its socket and get some proper treatment. She did give me a shot of painkiller, but then it seemed like the Egyptian National Security would not let the ambulance leave to go to the hospital and kept insisting that I get onto the plane. And finally, after about an hour of wrangling and 175 passengers waiting in the airplane, they decided that they would just take me like that. And I got onto the plane. To my surprise, sitting next to me on either side were the very 2 men that had just treated me so brutally. And I insisted that the worst one of them leave, and he was put somewhere else on the airplane.
So you were able to talk at this point?
Yes, but I was at that point traveling with one of the thugs, and the airplane crew took pity on me, tried to help me physically with painkillers and other blankets, and they made a hot water bottle out of a big bottle of Coke, and then asked if there was a doctor in the plane. And my only stroke of luck in the whole trip was that there was not only a doctor but an orthopedic surgeon who set up like a table on the aisle of the airplane and got the stewardesses to help him and physically reset my arm, and was just a real godsend.
For this whole interview, go to our website, thestruggle.org, and click on podcast. What happened to Medea Benjamin is an outrage. We call for a full government investigation into what happened in the State Department and to find out whether it was extreme incompetence or willful misconduct. On Saturday, March 29th, Central Connecticut State University will be host to the conference One Nation Under Surveillance, a civil liberties conference. It's open to the public. We hope to film. Its keynote speaker is Christopher Hedges. He's a former bureau chief for the New York Times in the Middle East. He's a writer of several books and now a full-time peace activist. Here's a short clip of him speaking in 2009 at a time when the Gaza massacre was going on.
There will be more Palestinian children who die. There will be more UN schools used as a sanctuary by terrified families, blown to bits by Israeli bombs, with more than 40 killed, half of whom were women and children. There will be more emaciated, orphaned children. There will be more screaming or comatose wounded in the corridors of Gaza's glutted hospital corridors. And there will be more Israeli lies. For that is what governments do in war. They distort and manipulate the facts, knowing that propaganda is a vital instrument in wartime. The shelling of the UN school in Jabalia took place, Israel said, because Hamas fighters had been firing mortars from near the school entrance. And they offered proof, an aerial photo which showed the school and the mortar. But the photo it was uncovered was more than a year old. It was a lie.
One civil liberty issue that will be touched on at the conference is the strong arming of student groups by college administrators when it comes to the issue of Palestine, probably at the behest of Zionist and anti-Muslim hate groups. Here, courtesy of Democracy Now!, is their segment on what's going on at Northeastern University.
Well, the Northeastern University chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine has become the latest student group to face reprimand for organizing around Palestinian issues. Northeastern University has just suspended the group until 2015, barring it from meeting on campus and stripping it of any university funding. The move comes just weeks after student activists distributed mock eviction notices across the campus during Israeli Apartheid Week. The mock notices were intended to resemble ones used by Israel to notify Palestinians of pending home demolitions or property seizures.
Northeastern University accused the student group of disregarding university policies over an extended period of time. Michael Armeni, Northeastern Union's senior vice president of external affairs, said, quote, "The issue here is not one of free speech or the exchange of disparate ideas. Instead, it's about holding every member of our community to the same standards and addressing SJP's non-compliance with long-standing policies to which all student organizations at Northeastern are required to adhere." We're joined now by two guests. Max Geller is with us, Northeastern University School of Law student and a member of Students for Justice in Palestine. Let's go first to Boston, to Northeastern University. Max, what happened? Why have you been decertified as a student organization, and what is Students for Justice in Palestine attempting to do?
We have been suspended as an organization because the administration feels that they can no longer control our activities, and this is the best option they have left.
And what are the violations, repeated violations, they claim that you've been engaged in?
I think it's insubordination is what their claim is, that they said it's a pervasive rule violation. But what really happened was we distributed a bunch of flyers, and the Hillel organization on my campus lost their temper and pressured the university into calling the police on us.
Now, Max, you're a Jewish student, part of Northeastern University Law School, with the group Students for Justice in Palestine. Explain this last act that you didn't get permission for. Explain why you did distribute these, mock eviction notices that you slipped under residents' doors, students' doors?
Yes, Amy. I mean, it's important to understand in the context of the greater repression of our activities. Prior to our official suspension, we were suspended in everything but name. We were constantly thwarted and deprived funding. Our events were moved around and roadblocks were put up. The only recourse we had, the last educational activity we could engage in was a sort of direct action where we didn't need university funding or a university space. We went door to door and slipped mock eviction notices under people's door, but we were careful because we wanted to simulate the sort of common Palestinian experience of coming home to find that your residency and existence has been criminalized.
Ali.
Amy, I think it's really important to understand that Northeastern students put up flyers where they're not supposed to every day. Every day, every student at Northeastern walks by flyers that weren't authorized to be put up, but the only time you ever hear about students being disciplined for it is when the content contains pro-Palestinian messages.
And Max, what are the plans for your group? Are you going to challenge this ban at all, or how are you going to continue to function or operate in the future?
Well, I'm pleased to say that the outpouring has been overwhelming. We have received in less than 24 hours over 3,500 signatures to our petition, and we are right now considering the most spectacular way of delivering these petitions to the president's door. We have had student groups who are pretty apathetic. I mean, politically speaking, the debate team has offered to engage in a walkout of class on SJP's behalf, and it's been really inspiring and moving. But we are still trying to figure out the best way to sort of catch this lightning in a bottle and force the university's hand.
We close with Mike Daly of Interfaith Peace Builders, talking about how he got involved with the issue of Palestine.
As I was thinking about what I wanted to say, I was glad she asked for me to speak about my personal journey. It's easy to get caught up in sort of the day-to-day of the work all the time, so it was fun to reflect back and think about some of the things that led me to here and are really reasons I love my work at Interfaith Peace Builders. So I'll just start with that briefly and then move on to some background about Interfaith Peace Builders. This was all an accident. When I went to college, my dad was convinced I was going to be a chemist or a doctor, things he coincidentally is. But I got interested in Middle Eastern history and sort of began this lifelong odyssey that's led me to here. In the summer of 2000, I moved to Ramallah, Israel, Palestine, and the West Bank. And I'd lived right before that a year in Cairo, Egypt, and I was learning Arabic, and I moved to the West Bank. And some of you will remember that's right around the time that Camp David II failed. And, you know, I was studying the Middle East, I was aware of this. But really only 2 months after I moved to, I was between Ramallah and Jerusalem, actually. I was at work one day, I was working for the United Nations at that point, and we got a fax from our central office in Jerusalem that said, you might want to leave work early today. There may be disturbances on the road on the way home. Ariel Sharon, who just passed away, just visited the Temple Mount, or the Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem, a kind of provocative political act, and there may be disturbances. Well, little did we know that those disturbances we did see that afternoon were the start of what became called the Second Intifada, or the Al-Aqsa Intifada. And so I lived in Palestine. I commuted back and forth between Jerusalem and Ramallah for that subsequent year. And what I saw there, a couple years out of college, just starting to learn Arabic, just starting, in many senses, to sort of begin my adult life, really opened my eyes and really led me to consider a lot of things I'd been taught here, led me to question, certainly what I learned about the Middle East, but it also led me over, it was a great gift because it led me to question also domestic policy and some things that I think many of us are looking at as struggles that continue here in the U.S. And so there's a lot I could say about that year in Jerusalem, but I think just a couple things are really important to sort of my life journey and really segue nicely into my work at Interfaith Peace Builders. Obviously, I witnessed a lot of oppression. Just getting to work, sort of what would normally be a 15-minute drive, could often take an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours because of the checkpoints along the way. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3 Israeli checkpoints. I saw clashes, I saw skirmishes, I saw Palestinians with rocks facing Israeli tanks and bulldozers, and increasingly, eventually, Apache helicopters. We heard the F-16 supplied by the US flying over as that second intifada got worse and worse. And so all of the hospitality that I sort of am telling the story mainly about my year in Palestine, but I also lived 3 years in Syria and a year in Cairo before that, and I'd received great hospitality from people. I'd sort of had this political awakening. And when I talked to my friends and family back in the United States about what I was seeing and witnessing in Israel-Palestine, my sense of what was happening was very different from their sense. And I don't think I have to tell this crowd that. And that led me to really want to somehow try to figure out a way to bridge what I was learning and seeing, what my good friends were telling me about the situation, with sort of misinformation, widespread misinformation here in the United States, fused with really, in my opinion, our government's support of one side, our government's sort of implicit and sometimes overt support of human rights abuses in Palestine. And so that, those are several sort of nodes along my journey to getting involved in this conflict. I think that segues perfectly into my work at Interfaith Peace Builders, because that's what IFPB actually is all about. That desire I had to sort of figure out ways to tell my family and friends what was actually happening and going on is what Interfaith Peace Builders over the last 14 years has done with our delegations. We send people to Israel-Palestine on 2-week-long delegations. They meet up to 30 groups and individuals along the way, and really representing a spectrum of society, grassroots activists, academics, sometimes politicians, students, to try to get a sense of what's actually happening on the ground over there, as I did when I was living there, right?
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.